Now, President Obama takes a step to better acknowledge suicides in the U.S. military. Under the decision, the president would send his condolences to families of soldiers who commit suicide in combat zones. It follows years of focus on an increasing problem. Last year, for instance, there were 468 suicides throughout the armed forces, more than died in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. 301 were in the regular Army, Reserves, and National Guard, up more than 20% from the year before. There were 54 Air Force suicides, the most since 1994. Suicides in the U.S. Marine Corps fell nearly 30%. The Navy saw a slight decline as well. For years, service chiefs and the secretaries of the Army, Navy, and Air Force did send condolence letters to the families, but in most cases, the commander-in-chief did not. But in his statement yesterday, President Obama said it's time to change that policy, at least for those in combat zones. He said, "These Americans served our nation bravely. They didn't die because they were weak, and the fact that they didn't get the help they needed must change." Military officials have long downplayed a direct correlation between war experiences and suicide.
When you look at our suicides, about a third of them happen before somebody has deployed with no history of deployment. About a third happen during a deployment, and about a third in the year after they return home.
But soldiers and Marines say that what they experience on the battlefield can have profound effects, both while they're there and after they return home.
I was big on the alcohol, ruined some relationships, work suffered. And it took a while before I figured out that this was not good. And it took some intervention from some good friends of mine to tell me, hey, you gotta get help and get going.
Is it hard for Marines to admit that they have this problem because it feels like weakness?
A little bit. A lot of it is you just don't realize it.
The Army Vice Chief of Staff, General Peter Corelli, responding to the president's action, acknowledged this week that wars do inflict hidden damage. He said in a blog post, the persistent high operational tempo, the terrible things some have seen or experienced in combat, have undoubtedly taken a toll on them. Many are struggling with the invisible wounds, including traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, depression, and anxiety. The new policy went into effect 2 days ago and is not retroactive. And for more, we go to retired Army General Ronald Griffith. He was Army Vice Chief of Staff from 1995 to 1997. He's now a consultant. And former First Lieutenant Paul Rieckhoff is the Executive Director of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, an advocacy group. Paul Rieckhoff, I'll start with you. In what ways was this move by the President important? What was the problem it addresses?
Well, I think it addresses the problem that soldiers were dying in the theater of combat and they weren't properly recognized by the president and by our nation. So you've got these folks who've taken their own lives in the line of duty. Last month in the Army alone, there were 27 of them. And this recognizes their sacrifice. It recognizes their service, and it tells the families that they are appreciated by their president. It's a small step, but I think it symbolically is a big one in that it can help erode the stigma, which is one of the biggest problems we face in combating these types of problems.
And there has been a long-running debate over this, right? Was there a lot of pressure on the military and the White House to make a move like this?
Yeah, I think there was. I mean, from advocacy groups, from military family support groups, it sounds like this has been in the works for some time, and folks like General Corelli have been powerful advocates for the community. But we have to recognize that there is a much deeper, much bigger problem at the root here. The suicides that you mentioned are only really the tip of a much larger iceberg, because those are only the suicides that happen on active duty. When folks come home, they leave the military, they detach from the Department of Defense, they become veterans. The number of veteran suicides we see is much higher anecdotally, but we don't know. There's no tracking mechanism right now for a veteran who's been out for 6 months or for 5 years and then takes his own life. So we need increased focus on that part of this equation as well.
All right, let me bring in General Griffith. Do you think this was a useful move, and have you seen a change in the thinking within the military about suicide and depression?
Well, I clearly have seen a great deal of concern on the part of the Army leadership in the last 3 or 4 years with regard to suicides. There's clearly And I go back to General Corelli's comments, which were given in part. Another point that General Corelli made in those same remarks was that the Army's tired. These soldiers, most particularly our combat armed soldiers, have been deployed and redeployed and redeployed again. And the tempo has just been extraordinary, and the pressures of the combat environment are extreme. And so I think clearly we have seen in the latter part of these two conflicts, the latter years of these two conflicts, the suicide rates go up. So I think there's no doubt that the combat environment, the deployments, the wear and tear on our people is a contributor. And I think that when we do lose a soldier, any time we lose a soldier, it's unfortunate. It's particularly unfortunate when one takes his own life or she takes her own life. And so, yes, I think it's appropriate.
And have you seen a growing awareness of this? You mentioned the leadership. What about at all ranks, middle and lower ranks, where these things are likely to take place, after all? Do you think there's a better understanding of the pressures that you're talking about and General Corelli's talking about?
I think clearly within the senior non-commissioned officer ranks, the officer ranks of the Army, there's a keen awareness of this. There's been a lot of talk recently about resiliency training. We prepare soldiers very well physically for the environments. We prepare them through training for the operational demands of the environment. And I think it's important, as the Army is doing now, the psychological preparation of soldiers, the resiliency training that has become not only widely employed across the force, but also widely accepted based on all the feedback I get at all levels of the Army.
Now, Paul Rydkoff, you're suggesting, though, that this is only a small step, doesn't go far enough. It does only deal with suicides, for example, that take place in war zones, and the majority, as far as we know, I guess, take place when soldiers and Marines come back home.
That's right. About 2/3 of the recent active duty suicides have happened outside of combat theater. So this will, only impact a small percentage of the overall group affected. But I think this event, this change in policy, should serve as a wake-up call. We have a major problem in this country with suicides, both on active duty and in the veterans community. We're losing a soldier every 36 hours to suicide. That is a major problem. And again, we're not even tracking the 2.3 million veterans who've come home and have cycled out of the military since 9/11. We have thousands of members all across the country, and this is the issue. They come up to me and they say, you got to talk about suicides. You got to get us help. This is a good step forward to reducing stigma, but we really need to galvanize the country, and the president can lead the way here on fully mobilizing people behind tackling suicide. As an example, we have a critical shortage of qualified mental health care workers throughout the military, throughout the VA. The president can issue a national call to action to say, if you want to serve your country, be a qualified mental health care worker, go to school, become certified, or work at the DOD and VA. That will help us reduce claims backlogs. That will help us get relief to the point of attack. It'll give these folks the support and hope that they need, because we've been talking about this issue for going on 5-6 years. We're going to be back on your program again, because this problem is going to continue to grow unless we get immediate and really comprehensive approaches to tackling the larger problem.
Well, General Griffith, address that, because that stigma that he's talking about, and we saw it in that little clip where I was talking to the Marine, that stigma is real. Everybody I've ever talked to, we've done many stories on this on the program, stigma seems to be real. How do you get past that?
Oh, clearly I think the stigma is real, and I must in candor say that when I first heard this announcement, I was not completely sold that it was the right thing to do.
In what ways? What were your concerns?
Because not every soldier who dies by suicide dies under honorable conditions. There have been circumstances for suicides as a result of less than honorable actions on the parts of individuals. Mm-hmm. After having made myself more informed on the issue, I think what we're doing is appropriate, because it does leave the latitude, as I understand the policy, for a field commander to recommend to the department. In this particular case, a letter from the president would not be appropriate. So it's not a wholesale matter, as I understand it. Mm-hmm. There are exceptions, and again, I go back to my experiences in Vietnam. There were cases in Vietnam where I'm aware of suicides that would not have been appropriate for the letters to go.
And what about going the further step, which is to that majority of suicides, and of course all the depression out there that take place outside of the war zone?
Well, I clearly think that, again, if it takes place while a soldier's on active duty, the commander needs to have input and make recommendations to whether such would be appropriate or not for the president to send a letter. I think also most of these soldiers certainly coming out or should be, if they're not, they should be within the Veterans Administration system. And so there's monitoring that goes on in that fora that I think also informs. And I agree that if it's a result of the trauma of combat, that it's fully appropriate for the president to recognize that and acknowledge it with a letter to the family. And
a brief last word, Paul Rieckhoff, you're saying we still have a long way to go to get there, right?
We have a huge way to go. And these folks are coming home to the toughest economy in decades. They're coming home to roughly 20% unemployment. That's what we see in our membership. And roughly 1/4, 1/3 are coming home with post-traumatic stress disorder or severe depression. And I'm meeting folks who are doing 5, 6, 7 tours. So General Corelli's right. They're tired. But we need to mobilize the entire country behind really supporting them, because I'm not seeing it in the field nationwide when these folks are coming home. It's really patchwork, and we have a long way to go before we can see that number start to decline.
All right, Paul Rieckhoff, General Ronald Griffith, thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.